you'll open your Bibles to John chapter 10. This story takes place right after Jesus heals the blind man who was born blind from birth. And there's a great deal of debate over what happened there, and Jesus calls the man over to him and talks to him and declares that he is the Messiah. And he talks to him about seeing, and at the very end of it, he says to the Pharisees, he says, they said, "Are you saying that we're blind?" And he says, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you see, your guilt remains." And he's talking about having, they claim that they see the truth of God. So Jesus is going to go on into this teaching thing, and he's going to say, "Verily I tell you, very truly I tell you." Listen up, this is a teaching moment. That's what he's saying here. And he's going to talk directly to the Pharisees. Now remember, they were really upset because this guy is declaring, that Jesus healed him. In fact, they're going, "Who is this guy?" And he goes, "I don't know. All I can tell you is he gave me sight." And Jesus was talking about being the light of the world, being able to give that sight. So here, we're going to pick up, and Jesus is going to start talking directly to the Pharisees. Now, they were one of his biggest opponents. And I've said this before, I kind of like the Pharisees a little bit. I know it's a weird thing to say because so often they turn out to be kind of the bad guys to Jesus' good guy. But here's the reason why I like the Pharisees. They really, truly wanted to keep the Word of God. Their downfall was they stopped worshiping God and started worshiping the law. So it wasn't important. The law wasn't important to them because it pointed to God. The law was the end-all, be-all of existence, and that's where they failed. Jesus came and actually lived out the law. Jesus, when he healed on the Sabbath day, he understood and was teaching that the Sabbath day was about freedom. And a person who is enslaved, whether it's to an illness or a sickness, or they don't have full freedom. And that's why when they confront him on healing on the Sabbath day, he goes, why shouldn't I heal on that day? That's what the Sabbath is all about. So Jesus came and actually lived out the law and taught what the law meant, and that's where the Pharisees had trouble. And, of course, Jesus is making here, in the process of these speeches, he's making some seriously heavy statements, including, "I am," which we saw last time. I mean, Jesus just comes flat out and says, before Abraham was, I am, and they understand totally what he's saying, that he's saying he's God. So he's going to talk to the Pharisees a little bit, and he's going to say to them, "Listen to me, Pharisees. Anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief or a robber." Let me tell you a story about that. When I was in military school, in high school, I had a friend named Scott Cawthorn, and Scott went home for Christmas break, and his parents had moved houses. So when he got home, his parents hadn't been able to meet him. They'd had a car pick him up at the airport and take him home. And when he got home, he realized he had a problem. He didn't have a key to the house. So Scott climbed in through, he went around, the kitchen window was open, and he climbed in through the kitchen window, and his neighbors called the police because here was this person that they had never seen climbing into this house. And so Scott got in, and he went to the front door. He left his bags at the front door, got his bags, carried them in, and a few minutes later, the police pull up and bang on the door, and he answers the door, and they arrest him. And Scott goes, "But this is my house." And they're saying, "Well, your neighbor said that they've never seen you before, and you were climbing in the kitchen window." And he goes, "Well, my parents moved while I was at school, and they forgot to leave me a key." And they're going, "Come with us." He goes, "Look, my picture's on the piano. Do you see it? It's right there. There's my picture." And he was still wearing his uniform, and the picture is of him in his uniform, and they're going, "Come with us." So he spent like several hours down at the police station before his parents came and got him. But he didn't have a key, and he didn't enter through the door. And he was he told that story, he was so upset because he said, "My picture was right there. I was pointing at it. Look, it's me, In this case, Jesus says, "Listen, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the correct way, if they don't enter by the gate, then they have a problem. If you don't come into the sheep pen by the way that I have set up, then you're a robber. You're a thief. Now, shepherds are very protective of their sheep because sheep can get into a lot of trouble. They're not very defensive. They will allow an animal to kill them. They especially if it gets into the pen. If it gets into the pen, there's nowhere for them to go. Sheep. I lived in the Middle East for a little bit, and I got to see a Bedouin shepherd family come through, and they had somebody guarding the pen at all hours, day or night, unless the sheep were out of the pen, and then, of course, the shepherd was with them. But they had either the shepherd himself or one of his children guarding the sheep pen all the time that the sheep were in the pen. And that was to keep, like mountain lions and things like that from getting down and getting into the pen and killing the sheep. And anybody who breaks in to the pen is there for no good. Wouldn't you agree? A couple weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, a friend of mine in Waynesboro said that she woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning and she heard something in her kitchen, and her bedroom is close to where her kitchen is, and she went out there and a man was trying to climb through her kitchen window at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she said she spun around and looked, and there was a cast iron skillet on the oven. She works at Cracker Barrel, and she has one of those nice, big, heavy cast iron skillets, and she said she took a full baseball swing and knocked him out in the middle of the yard. She said when he landed, he hid out in the yard and was just laying there, crying, and she called the police, and he took off running. She said he was staggering all over the place, and I thought to myself, boy, I bet he never tries that again, And then I thought of Tangled, which is one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. And I thought where Flynn Rider swings that thing and goes, I have got to get me one of these. That man was coming in a way that showed that he was a thief and a robber. So he says to the Pharisees, listen, you guys are trying to get into a kingdom by the way my Father did not set up. Always, 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 from Genesis all the way through to Malachi, always in Scripture, coming to the Father is by faith. You cannot work your way into the kingdom. You can't do it. It's impossible. You can't be good enough to make it in, because what God declares of us, what God created us for, was perfection. And we fall short of the perfection that he created us to have because we have sin in our lives. And all of us do it. All of us experience it. All of us have that moment where we tell a lie. I mean, right now, Hannah's in this stage where you'll say, Hannah, the other day, she was pulling a basket apart. And I said, Hannah, don't pull the basket apart. And she said, I was just holding it and trying to twist it together. And I said, don't pull the basket, because she immediately started to do it again. I went, Hannah, don't pull the basket. Oh, no, I was just trying to put it back together, Just bold-faced lying to me right there as she's trying to pull it apart. We all do it. It's a part of us. It is an infection, an illness that leads to death. And it's been true since Adam and Eve fell. So it's always been by faith that God set it up for his people to come. That's why God is able to say, I don't want your sacrifices. I don't want this. I don't want that. What I want you to do is I want you to take care of the widows and orphans. What I want you to do is I want you to worship me from your heart. I want you to give to me because you love me, not because you have to. And see, what the Pharisees were teaching was you have to do this, 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 and this, where God is saying, no, what I want is your heart. I don't want you to follow just because you have to. I want you to follow me because you want to, because you love me. So Jesus says to them, you are trying to come in by the back gate. There's only one gate, and you're trying to crawl over the fence or come under the fence, or you're trying to find some way in that the shepherd doesn't want you to come in. He goes, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will not follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to show you a video here in a second, but there's a second video that I saw while looking for this video. And there's two girls, and they're out with a shepherd. And in the hold on this one for just a second. These two girls are out with the shepherd, and the shepherd calls the sheep over, and he gives the sheep something to eat, and it eats out of his hand. And so he calls it over, and one of the girls goes to feed it, and all of the sheep run away, including the one that she was trying to feed, and she just turns around shocked. So the shepherd calls over another one and gives it a piece of food, and then he gives a piece to another girl, and she goes to do it, and the sheep run away from her. And here he's saying, the sheep know the shepherd's voice, and they follow the shepherd. But anyone who's a stranger, they run away from. Rightly so, because there's danger there. You know, we teach our kids, stranger danger. Hannah's learning that right now, and so she's asking people, are you a stranger? You know, this morning she came in and asked Judy, she said, Judy, what is your name? And Judy said, my name's Judy. And Hannah said, I know your name is Judy. You know, I want to show you this video because here what we have is an illustration of this, real time. This is a video that's about a couple years old. But what you're going to see here is you're going to see a number of people calling to these sheep, and then you're going to see the shepherd call to the sheep. And I want you to watch the reaction of the sheep. What they're going here is they're going, "Suki, suki, suki, suki." Now here comes the shepherd. I know you can't hear the sound on it, but watch the sheep when he starts to call. Now, the only difference here, you know, you saw 3 people go out and call, and then the shepherd go out and call. They all say, if you watch the video, go on YouTube and look up shepherd recognizes sheep. The only difference is that the shepherd calls the sheep. The one girl goes out and she goes, hey, Suki, 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 nothing. The second one, hey, Suki, 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 nothing. The third one, hey, Suki, 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 nothing. The farmer goes out and goes, hey, Suki, 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 and they all go, you know, and they're looking, and he calls them again, and they're looking, and then they all come running up to him. I saw that when I was there with that Bedouin shepherd family. There was a little girl that would take him out every day, little shepherdess, and she would take him out every day. And she would call to them, and they would turn and look at her. The whole time, I mean, we were right there. They didn't pay any attention to us. You know, all of the guys that were on our dig site, they didn't pay any attention to us. But whenever that little girl spoke, those sheep heard, and those sheep paid attention. So Jesus says that his followers, his sheep, his believers are like that. They recognize his voice. That's why it's important for us to hear his voice. We should be in our Bibles every day. Who here watches TV every day? Yeah. Who here looks at the internet every day? Yeah. Who here is on Facebook at least 3 times a day? All right. Or other social media. You know. Who here reads their Bible at least 3 times a day? Oh, I got one. Got another one back there. You know, in order to understand the shepherd, in order to be one of the shepherd's people, we have to recognize his voice. You know, and we're warned that we should test the spirits, that we should test those who come and teach us things, that we should pay attention to what is being taught. You know, and how do we recognize a false voice from a good voice? And there are false voices out there. There are people that I believe are false teachers, and I do not listen to them. And I could stand here and name them off all day long. And some of them are popular. I mean, there's people who are big followers of these people. And I go, yeah, but what they're teaching isn't biblical. You know, and the reason I know that is because I read the Bible. I go to the Bible. I listen to what Jesus has to say. And Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, you guys are teaching what my Father didn't say. Yes, you're trying to teach the law, but you're teaching the law the wrong way. You are making people slaves to the law rather than setting them free the way the Father intended them to be. You are declaring a slavery to the law when what God intended was belief to set them free. And that's what I'm here to do. In fact, Jesus says to them, I am the gate for the sheep, and all who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Now, I want you to hear this. There are exclusive statements that Jesus says, and when I say exclusive, I mean they exclude any other way to come to the Father, or any other way to come to heaven, or any other way to come to a saving knowledge except through Jesus Christ. And Jesus makes these statements, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by me. Here he says, I am the gate, and no one enters in except through me. That means that, you know, for people who want to say, well, there's so many, they're all one God. You know, the God that the Muslims worship is the same God as the Christian God, you know, and they're all the same God. It's just different ways of approaching it. False. You cannot be a believer in Jesus Christ and believe that. If that is true, then there's no need for Jesus to die on the cross. If that is true, then there is nothing, then we can work our way into heaven. Then all we have to do is climb the mountain our own way. And see, the problem is Jesus isn't up on the mountain. Jesus came down to us where we were because we couldn't get there. And in all these other religious systems, you have to climb up to where God is. In this one, God came down. God approached us. God made it possible for us. Now, I want you to understand, here in the book of John, Jesus teaches that he died for the sins of all of mankind. Now, I want you to hear that. Every man, every woman, every child, Jesus died for their sins. Their sins are covered by his blood. But salvation is only applicable to those people who accept what he has won for us. Those people who choose to enter through the gate. They can either stay outside of the gate or they can come into the gate. They don't have to come in. But there's only one way to make it to safety. There's only one way to make it to the place where the shepherd guards you, and that is through the gate that the shepherd has built. Do you understand? You know, I could go out and I could buy a couple hundred donuts and set them up here. I could bring the holy food into the church. And I could set them here and say, I paid for them, you can come and eat them. And there would be people who would come up and get a donut, and there are people who would not. Even though I had paid for enough donuts to cover everybody in the church. There are people who would leave without a donut. You know, they're wanting to watch that figure. Or maybe because I'm a Dunkin' Donuts fan, they're a Krispy Kreme fan, you know, and they're going, I'm sorry, it's not Krispy Kreme, I'm not eating it. You know? Karen. You know. And that's the same principle. Jesus gave his life to pay for our admission into the presence of his Father. He paid with his life to make us his children. But we have to accept and we have to enter in. And we have to enter in by the way that he set it up. We can't make our own way in. We can't say, okay, well, yeah, okay, you can believe in Jesus, but you have to believe in Jesus and. You have to believe in Jesus and do this. You have to believe in Jesus and do this. No, no, no. Jesus says you have to believe in me and enter in. Anyone who teaches otherwise is a robber or a thief trying to steal those sheep that belong to Jesus. He says, I am the gate, and whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out, and they will find pasture. In other words, they'll find a place where they have food. They'll find a place where they have water. They'll find a place where they have everything that they need. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. I've come to give life. I've come to give it to the full. The people who are trying to steal away, the people who are trying to teach things that are false, whether it's prosperity gospel, whether it's works-based gospel, what have you, whether they're saying, hey, you don't have to believe in Jesus in order to be saved. You can just be a good person. Whatever it is, if it doesn't fall in with what Jesus teaches, then they have one of three objectives. They're coming to steal, they're coming to kill, or they're coming to destroy, or all three. Because that is what Satan does. And whether those people realize it or not, that's who they're being motivated by. You know, a person that you let in, somebody whose family, they come in through the door. A thief comes in through the window. A thief breaks his way in and comes only with the purpose of taking what is not his. Then Jesus makes a second I am statement. So he says, I am the gate, and they're not really understanding what he's saying. It says here in verse 6, it says the Pharisees did not understand what Jesus was telling them, so he says, I am the gate, and then he says, I am the shepherd. So the shepherd sets up the gate, but he is also the good shepherd. And if you want to see what the good shepherd is and how he takes care of his people, go to Psalm 23. I almost hate that we use Psalm 23 as a funeral psalm because it's not a funeral psalm. It is a psalm of joy and a psalm of praise. It is a psalm of sheep understanding that he is being protected by the shepherd. It's somebody who is praising because their needs are met, because they have rest, because they have somebody standing between them and the bears and the lions and all the things that come to kill them. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me because you are my protector. You set up a table for me in the presence of my enemy. When my enemy is there, hey man, I'm having a feast. I'm not worried about what the enemy's doing because my shepherd is standing between me and the enemy who's at the gate. My shepherd protects me. It is an awesome psalm. Go to Psalm 23 and read it and see how God, the good shepherd, takes care of his people. Psalm 22, Psalm 23, and Psalm 24 paint an amazing picture of Jesus. Psalm 22, the sacrificial servant, you see Jesus die on the cross. There is a description of crucifixion in there and how it affects the body that's amazing. And you see Jesus say that, or you see the psalmist say that Jesus is coming to save all, that he's coming to make it possible for all, not just for Jews, but for anyone from all languages, all tribes, all people groups to come and know God the Father. Psalm 23, we see the good shepherd who acts as a protector for his people, who takes them to where the food and the water is, who makes sure that they have rest, who stands between them and danger. Psalm 24, we see the good king who rules his people justly and with care. Read those. It's amazing. So here Jesus says in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And I love this because, Jesus is telling them something that's coming up. And like John says so many times, they heard this message and they didn't fully understand. And I'm sure John, thinking back on this, John is picking things that Jesus taught to make sure they emphasize what he's getting at here. And he talks about this several times. He says, I am the one who lays down my life for my sheep. Now, here's the thing. The hired hand is not the shepherd, and he doesn't own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it, and the man runs away because he's a hired hand and he doesn't care anything about the sheep. A hired person doesn't have the same investment as the person who is the owner, the person who is the master, the person who takes care of it. Molly and I were talking to a guy recently, and he owns a t-shirt shop. And he said, I find it so hard to go on vacation because then I have to leave the business to one of the people that I've hired. And he said, they don't care for it as much as I do. It's mine. You know, I've built it from the ground up. And he says, it's a real struggle for me. And I find when I'm on vacation, the temptation to go home every day that I'm there so that I can just make sure everything's running right. The hired person, vacation time comes, woohoo! Out the door they go. Why? They don't have the same investment. Here in this story, you have a man who is a hired helper, and he's standing between the sheep and the flock, and all of a sudden you have a wolf coming in, and he sees the wolf, and he goes, see ya, and takes off running, leaving the sheep to fend for themselves. And of course, the wolf gets in and scatters the flock. Where the shepherd stands between. And here's the thing, David understood this. David was a shepherd. Now, his brothers were too, but it seems like David was the one who was always out with the sheep. You know, when it came time to assign duties, all the other brothers did the more glorious stuff, and David got stuck with the sheep. And he enjoyed being a shepherd. You know, and he was out there, and he would protect the sheep. So he goes and he takes his brother's lunch, and he shows up on the battlefront, and you have this guy who's 9 feet tall, close to 10 feet tall. We were at Natural Bridge, and if you go to Natural Bridge in Virginia, there is a bear in there standing on its back feet, and it's 9.5 feet tall. And I was standing next to it with a friend of mine who's also a pastor, and I said, you realize that this is the height Goliath was. You know, we're standing there looking way up there, you know, at this thing. And I'm going, this is the size Goliath was. And so Goliath is standing there, and he's going, who will come out and challenge me? And David goes, he's just a man. Man, I have fought off bears, and I fought off lions. That's just a dude. I'll take him on. I've got God on my side. Man, I won't even have to get close to him. I'm going to smack him down with a stone. See, David was the shepherd, and that shepherd instinct came out in him, where the other king, Saul, was afraid and hiding in his tent. David, who had the heart of a shepherd, stepped into that shepherd's role, not for the sheep, but for the people of God. David, I don't think, until we see him fall and sleep with his friend's wife, I think David never truly saw himself as a king. He saw himself as a shepherd in the king's role. So David stood and protected. It was only when he stepped outside of that role of shepherd that he got himself in trouble. But as long as he was standing guard, as long as he was watching, as long as he was standing in between and guarding God's people, he was doing what he was called to do. And that's the power there. And Jesus is saying, that's who I am. I stand between all of the dangers of life and you. I stand there to protect you. When you get thrown, sheep will get thrown. They get tossed over on their back. They cannot get up. I'm there. When you are sick, I am there. When you are well, I am there. When you need rest, I am there. When you need food, I am there. When you need water, I am there. I am there to protect you. He says, I am the good shepherd, verse 14, and I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know him. My sheep are as much a part of me as I am of the Father. I make them a part of me, and they hear me, and they know me. And then he says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen, and I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord, and I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father. So Jesus gives them a couple truths here that, again, I don't think they understood until after Jesus rose again. Number one, I have sheep that are not of this flock. Now, Jesus says he came to the Jews first, and Jesus' ministry was largely focused to the Jews. Now, we do know that he taught in the Decapolis, but the majority of his time was spent among the Jews, and his ministry was to the Jews. And most of those who responded to him were Jewish. Now, there were a couple. There was a Roman centurion and a couple others, but most of his focus is on the Jews. But he says, I have sheep that are not of this flock. I have sheep that are scattered worldwide among every people group. And I'm going to bring them together into one flock, Jews and Gentiles together, believing through me and having access to the Father through me. So that's truth number one. Truth number two, the reason, he says, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. And this is authority that has been given to me. Now, how many times do we see? In fact, at the end of this lesson, Jesus is going to keep on teaching, and you'll go through the end. He'll speak at a festival that's coming up, and at the end of the festival, again, we saw the last time they picked up stones to stone him. They pick up stones to stone him, and Jesus just walks away. Why? Because there was only one person who had the authority to take his life, and that was Jesus. When Jesus stands before Pilate, and Pilate says, are you the king? Jesus says, I am. And Pilate says, I don't want to do this. And Jesus says, you don't have any power to stop it. It's not by your authority that I'm being executed. It's by the authority of my Father that's been given to me. This has to happen. Jesus says, this is a command. Look at this. Right here in verse 18. Look in your Bible. This command I received from my Father. What command? That I lay down my life only to take it up again. Jesus came to die. And Jesus came to live again. The command that he had was to die, go in the grave, and stand up and walk back out of it. Now that's powerful. He took the entire wrath of God on himself and died. And then shrugged it off and walked out of the grave. He stood between the greatest foe that mankind has ever faced, God himself, and mankind, and took the attack. A holy God who cannot abide sin, a mankind that's filled with sin. Somebody had to do something to fix it. And God's command to his Son was, you need to be the shepherd. You need to stand in protection of the sheep. You need to lay your life down so that they can have life. I want you to hear the truth today. Jesus is the shepherd. He stands between us. He made the gate so that we can go in. He is the gate. Through him we find rest. Through him we find food. Through him we find all that we need. So my question to you is, do you believe in Jesus Christ? My question to you, if you have never heard the gospel, or if you've heard it 100 times over and you're not a Christian, are you willing to surrender and go in through the gate? Are you willing to believe in Jesus Christ and to enter in the way that he designed it, through him? God gave his only Son that whoever believes in him shall not perish. And whoever rejects him shall. God's heart is that none would perish. That's why he sent his Son. And as a believer, do you see how important it is to know the shepherd? Do you see how important it is to hear his voice? Do you see how important it is to look to him when he calls? To go to his word each day so that you recognize his call amidst all of the other voices calling to you in a day's time. Those voices that come in through the internet, those voices that come in through your car radio, those voices that come in through the TVs and the movies and the newspapers and all the different stuff that you have coming at you, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's family, all the voices that are calling out for your attention, there's one voice to which you respond. And are you listening for it? Are you looking for the shepherd? Are you listening to hear his voice among the clutter? And if you do hear his voice, are you willing to follow?